Board of Appeals meeting to order for the month of November 2019. Isn't it amazing how quickly this year came to almost a close? Kind of crazy. Thanksgiving is almost here, so happy Thanksgiving to everybody and to my colleagues. Hopefully you'll have a blessed one with your family and your friends, or if you're by yourself and you go to a restaurant, hopefully the food will be good. So at this point in time, I normally just introduce everybody up here on the dais so everyone understands who everyone is. And I usually start over here. Mr. Bosenbrook is to my far left, your far right. And this is Mr. Kalsunas, who is an alternate to this board, but he will be voting as a full voting member of the board tonight. And this is Vice Chairman Agawas. And I'm Glenn Clark, the chairman of the board. This is Mr. What's your name? Eisenbacher. I've known him forever. Mr. Desmond to his right. And this is Mr. Green, who is a alternate to the board as well. So we actually have two. It's a little unusual for us to have two alternates, but City Council has appointed them to vote in the stead of a member that isn't able to be here at a particular meeting. And then over here on the side is Mr. Evans, who represents the city administration, and he supports the board. And then this is the actual city attorney for the city of Troy, Ms. Bloom. And so we're happy to have her here tonight. And then at this point in time, I'd like to call on Vice Chairman Agawas to read the rules. We're going to do roll call first. Mr. Evans.
Mr. Clark.
I'm here.
Mr. Agawas.
Here.
Mr. Desmond.
Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Here.
Mr. Kalsunas. Mr. Green.
Here.
Mr. Bosenbrook.
Here.
Great. We have a full board tonight. And I'll just call on Vice Chairman Agawas to read the rules and procedures. So this is for everyone who is going to participate tonight, or just to better understand how we operate. So we do have set rules. So the Vice Chairman is going to read them. We will follow them because this chairman is all about the rules. So here we go.
The Zoning Board of Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors appointed by City Council to decide on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Petitioners must indicate a hardship or practical difficulty with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. The board will hear the items in the order that they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request should raise their hand, and when recognized by the chairman, come up to the podium. The speaker should identify themselves with name and address, indicate their relationship to the property in question, such as next door neighbor, live behind the property, etc., and state whether they are in favor of or against the variance request, and give reasons for their opinion. Comments must be directed through the chairman. Comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertain to the matter under consideration. Only one person will be recognized by the chairman to speak at one time. At the conclusion of public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or postpone the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes are needed. If the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to Oakland County Circuit Court.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Agawas. To sum it up, I'm kind of been trying to do this the last meeting or two. There are no comments from the gallery other than from this microphone. And there are no comments from the board except right here from the microphones. So if you have a comment, you're going to have to be wanting to come to the podium, but after we close out any public comment, we're done. So we're a quasi judicial body and we have to have decorum. So just be aware, like I said, there are rules, and it's not to be inferring on anyone's rights, it's just rules are rules. This Lutheran school boy knows about rules because I grew up with them at school. So let's just be really careful about what we're trying to do here tonight. Okay, so we have item 3, approval of minutes related to October 15, 2019. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns by a member of the board about what was presented? Seeing that there isn't any discussion, Mr. Green.
I move that we accept the minutes from the previous meeting from October 15th, 2019 as printed.
How about just to change one word, that you move to approve the minutes?
I move to approve
Okay,
the minutes.
very
from
good.
October
Is there a
25th.
second to Mr.
Second
Green's
that.
motions? Mr. Desmond seconds that. Any discussion from a member of the board? Hearing none. Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Bossenbrook.
Yes.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes. Motion carries. Those are approved. So now we move to item number 4, the approval of the agenda for tonight. So we have items A through E. Mr. Evans, do you have any changes? No. I think we can just move forward, correct? Yeah. I serve on 2 different public boards, so I can't remember which one we have to approve and which one we don't. So, the items that are presented on the agenda are set for the evening, and now we move on to the hearing of cases. So we have 5A related to 3109 Alpine and parcel 8820201020. Very complicated, it seems, doesn't it? Mr. Evans, please present to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This matter was postponed by the board after it was heard at our October meeting. I'll do a brief summary. This is for property on Alpine. This is an aerial map of the neighborhood. The property is outlined in red. Property is north of, the neighborhood's north of Big Beaver, in between Coolidge and Crooks. And there's a close-up of the property consisting of the parcels described on the west side of Alpine. And this is for a use variance in accordance with the Big Beaver zoning district. At last month's meeting, the board heard testimony from the applicants, had questions, there was public comment, and the board postponed to allow the city attorney to prepare a resolution incorporating the board's comments. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Okay. So on this particular item, we already had a public hearing. So I don't know if anyone is here. Do you want to just raise your hand if you are here for this item? If you're in the gallery? Okay. We already had public hearing. And it was noticed to the neighbors within so many 100-foot, whatever it's called, radius. And Mr. Eisenbacher made a motion, moved the city attorney to draft a resolution. I think maybe we should call Ms. Bloom at this point in time, because this was drafted by the city attorney's office on behalf of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You are correct in that you have closed the public hearing, so the board is prepared at this point in time, I believe, to take action on a resolution. There are some members who are here. I don't know if the board wants to entertain an opportunity to allow them to come forward or not. It's completely within your discretion whether or not you want to allow for that to happen. And we have prepared a resolution, and it was sent to all of you. Certainly, we're happy to take any suggestions. We incorporated your comments. We also looked at the standards and present that for your consideration tonight.
And in consultation with the city attorney earlier, between myself and our city attorney, we are going to allow the petitioner the right to allow Mr. Green to vote on this matter or not. He was here for the matter. He heard all the testimony and all the dialogue, but he wasn't sitting as a member of the board that night because he's an alternate. So I don't know if the petitioner has an issue. If that is the case, I'm just going to call the petitioner to this microphone right now. And I think Mr. Green has something to say too. So we'll let this gentleman speak and then Mr. Green will speak.
Good evening. Sorry for my lack of formality. I was not planning on speaking this evening, but we have no problem with Mr. Green if he wants to vote on the matter. So he was present at the last hearing and heard our testimony on both matters.
Gotcha.
So this applies to this matter and to the next one.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much. Mr. Green.
No further comment?
Okay. So on the matter of 3109 Alpine, there is a resolution that has been presented to us. It doesn't mean that the board, to my colleagues, that we have to accept it, even though this young lady's office worked really hard on it. We could accept it, we could decline it, we could amend it. It's really at the board's discretion. Do we have, Vice Chairman Nagawas, do we have any other correspondence on this matter?
None today, no.
Okay. So it's really at the board's discretion how to proceed forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Eisenbacher.
if there's no discussion from my colleagues on the board, I would like to read the resolution and move the resolution. Okay.
Apologies. I move that for all issues on this agenda that have been postponed or brought forward from previous meetings, we allow the public to present. Did we reopen the public hearing for comment for all matters for the as if they had not been held, but with previous comments still recorded?
Ms. Bloom.
Yes, it certainly is appropriate. It wouldn't be a reopening of a public hearing. It would just be to allow for public comment. And certainly if the board wants to do that, certainly there are some people who raise their hands. There may not be anybody who wants to address the board, but you could certainly offer that opportunity to them.
Okay, so, but the problem from what I see here is Mr. Eisenbacher's motion is the main motion, and Mr. Green.
I didn't move yet.
You didn't?
I'd like to move, and I didn't get seconded. So
That's splitting hairs. Mr. Green jumped in. So it would be proper to, I believe, Ms. Bloom.
Mr. Green's
Put this
motion is the motion pending right now because it wasn't seconded. So.
But neither have been seconded.
Okay, well, it's out there. If there's a second for it, then you should move ahead on that. If
Let's
not,
just do this. I'm a stickler for the details. So is there a second for Mr. Eisenbacher's motion? Mr. Kalsunas seconds that. That lays that on the table not on the table, but in our purview. And then if Mr. Green wants to make an amendment to that, that's the proper way to go.
Certainly. I move that we amend the motion from Mr. Eisenbacher to allow for additional public comment on all issues at the appropriate time as their agenda item comes up. But in this case,
Related to item A.
related to item A, prior to discussion and bringing of the, prior to reading and
Okay,
voting on the resolution.
Let's see if there's a second for your motion. Is there a second to reopen? Sorry, Mr. Desmond. Okay.
Or he can second.
So what we're going to do, Mr. Evans, is we're going to take a vote on the Green amendment, because you worked your way down. So we're ready for a vote for, to allow more public hearing, public comments, should say, on item A.
Should Mr. Eisenbacher's motion pass?
I didn't hear what you said.
Sorry, should Mr. Eisenbacher's motion pass?
Well,
Mine's only an amendment to his motion.
Right, but I think what we're going to do is we're going to kind of bifurcate them to allow, to essentially allow, if your motion or your amendment prevails, we'll
yes.
do the public comment and then go to the Eisenbacher motion.
No, according to the Robert rules, our motion is supposed to, we gotta go through. And then if the amendment comes after, we gotta accept it or not.
That's not correct.
No.
An amendment goes
Procedural.
first, yeah. An amendment goes first. So we're just going to do this really simple. So, so the Green Desmond amendment is going to be voted on. If it passes, we would do more public comment, and then we would vote on the Eisenbacher motion. Mr. Evans?
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis,
Yes.
Mr. Bossenbrook,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Agawas,
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Okay, so this is related to both items. So we're going to vote separately because there's two resolutions, but
And
there's not a second
sorry, sir.
resolution on the second item, but we'll let people come forward since it passed, the Green amendment passed. So we'll let people kind of talk about both of them at the same time or separately. Do you have a comment?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to clarify the point. That motion should also cover the item covering Mr. Apahedian's property as well.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sorry. I believe that motion should also, when we get to it, cover Mr. Apahedian's motion, application as well.
We haven't had an open, we haven't had a public hearing for his yet, so we have to have a public hearing for his.
Did, okay.
He fully postponed last time.
I apologize.
That was postponed. So there was no public hearing. So we will have a public hearing on that.
Apologize.
So, if you'd like to come and address the board on item A, please come forward to the microphone. That was a lot of work for no one wanting to come in. Just saying. Okay, so second call for public comment on item A. Come to the microphone and be recognized by the chairman. Third call for item A. Come to the microphone and be recognized. We close it out and we bring it back to the board table. Good job, Mr. Green. Trying to keep everything open to the public, which is great.
I thought it was fun.
Now we go to Mr. Eisenbacher's motion, which was seconded by,
I'll second.
Vice Chairman Agawa seconds that motion.
Okay, well, let me read it.
Please.
Resolved that the use variance for the property located at 3109 Alpine, currently zoned R-1B, one-family residential, be denied. The Zoning Board of Appeals makes the following findings and conclusions based on the written materials, comments, and testimony of the applicant's representatives, other interested persons, professional consultants, and other factual materials presented to the board to assist with deliberation. 1, the applicant has not demonstrated that the site cannot be used for any other use allowed within the current zoning designation of R1B. It is the explicit finding of this board that the property can be used for the purposes permitted in the current zoning district, R1B. 2, there are no unique circumstances peculiar to this property. The applicant has not proven that there are certain features or conditions of the land that are generally applicable throughout the zone, nor has the applicant demonstrated through expert testimony that these features make it impossible to earn a reasonable return without some adjustment. Specifically, A, the parcel is not exceptionally narrow or shallow, tending to prevent the site from being used for any other use allowed within the current zoning designation, R1B, and B, there are no topographic conditions or other extraordinary situations on the parcel tending to prevent the site from being used for any other use allowed within the current zoning designation, R1B. 3, granting a use variance where the applicant would be allowed to develop the parcel with any allowable use under BB, Big Beaver District zoning, will alter the essential character of the adjacent neighborhood and be a detriment to adjacent properties. 4, the applicant has not identified a specific use for the property within the proposed BB, Big Beaver District zoning. Therefore, it is difficult to adequately assess whether the capacity and operations of public roads, utilities, or other facilities and services will be significantly compromised. However, the BB district in general allows for more intensive uses than R1B zoning. Therefore, it is reasonable to presume the impact on the adjacent road, Alpine, which is smaller and more narrow than other roads in the BB district and which does not have enough right-of-way to construct a sidewalk, will be compromised. And 5, the need for the variance request is self-created by the applicant. Be it further resolved that this board is not addressing that portion of the application seeking to appeal the July 22, 2019 legislative decision of the Troy City Council denying Tollbrook West's request to rezone the property located at 3109 Alpine from R1B, one family residential district, to BB, Big Beaver District, because this board does not have jurisdiction over such a request under Troy's zoning ordinance, section 15.04B.
So this resolution has been moved and seconded properly, and now we just have discussion at the board table on the resolution. We can inquire as members of the city attorney or Mr. Evans, if anyone cares to do such. So a member of the board would like to be recognized. Mr. Rosenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm supportive of the resolution as drafted. However, I do have a few, I guess, suggested edits. I don't know if this is the appropriate forum to just kind of lay them out for the board's consideration or the city attorney.
Yes, sir.
So the first suggestion or comment that I have is, and these are all sort of, from my perspective, after reading the ordinance 15.05 or 15.04 on use variances, just to kind of, I guess, tailor it a little more closely to the language of the ordinance. So the first would be under 15.04F. Just pulled the language so I say it correctly.
What item is that?
Well, this is sort of the
last paragraph.
Before you get to number 1,
Okay. Right above number 1?
correct.
Okay.
So it says in the ordinance, it says a use variance may be allowed only in cases where there's a reasonable evidence of unnecessary hardship in the official record of the hearing and that all of the following conditions are met. So I would submit that in addition to the criteria 1, 2, 3, and 4, which track the language, or 5, I would also submit that the record doesn't just demonstrate an unnecessary hardship. This is kind of read in the disjunctive, it has to be both, or the conjunctive. So I think that's, in addition to the 5 elements, that there's also no evidence of an unnecessary hardship. That'd be my first comment. My second would be...
Be aware,
Yeah.
sir, I don't mean to interrupt, but a comment is a comment is a comment.
I have
You want
several
to-
comments.
If you want to move an amendment to the resolution, you'll have to do that.
Sure.
Otherwise, nothing will change.
So I'm going to lay out my comments, and then I'll
Yeah,
make an amendment
absolutely.
appropriately.
Very
So,
good. Okay.
so the second comment that I have is under bullet point number 1, where it says the applicant has not demonstrated that the site cannot be used. The ordinance says cannot reasonably be used. So I would add the word reasonably to bullet point 1. And then under, I guess this is under all 5 criteria, 1 through 5. I just want to make it clear from my perspective as a comment that I think we should indicate that the petitioner has failed to demonstrate all 5. That language is not in all 5 criteria, and the petitioner has to demonstrate meeting all 5 in order to be entitled to a use variance, and I would submit that they haven't done any of them, and so I would submit that all 5 would say the applicant or petitioner has failed to demonstrate. So those are my 3 comments.
Very good. Any more discussion? Hearing none,
So I will.
back to Mr. Bosenbrook.
I would like to move that the proposed resolution be adopted, subject to the amendments that I've just stated.
Second?
Moved and seconded based on Mr. Bosenbrook's comments that were just stated a minute ago, or 2. Seconded by Mr. Green. Any discussion?
Just for clarification, this is a motion to amend then. The motion
Right.
is to amend. Thank you.
To change the resolution, correct? Yep.
Motion to amend.
Seeing that there is any other discussion, Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote
Mr.
on the
Kelso?
amendment. This is just on the amendment, not on the final
Motion to
resolution.
amend.
Right. Mr.,
Yes.
hold on one second. Mr. Eisenbacher.
Quick question for the city attorney, if she has any concern about these amendments.
I do not. I think, again, this is the board's decision, and certainly we wanted to track as closely as possible, but I do not see any concerns with the amendments that are proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarification, if the amendment goes through, the next vote will be on the final resolution, which has been proposed, but it would have been changed to Mr. Bosenbrook's comments. So we're prepared for a vote, Mr. Evans.
Mr. Kaltsunis?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Bosenbrook?
Yes.
Mr. Agawas?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
So the amendment is agreed to. So now we are on the amended version of the resolution that Mr. Eisenbacher moved. So we are, I think, any other further discussion? See none, Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes is to deny, correct?
Yes is to,
Yes,
Yes.
Accept.
well, in a sense, no. Yes is to pass the resolution,
Yes.
which is to deny.
Yes to everything.
Mr. Bossenbrook,
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
The resolution is agreed to. Okay, we move on to item number A plus 1, in my opinion.
B.
Related to parcel 8820201020. I feel like I'm reading from a James Bond movie or something. I guess it doesn't have an address, so Mr. Evans.
I'm not sure I see this item on our agenda. I believe that's item A. We covered that.
This is item B, he was
Oh, okay.
phrased.
Got it. Yeah, this is for 3 properties on McClure, 3086, 3114, and 3142. This also is a use variance in accordance with the Big Beaver zoning district. The subject property is located in a neighborhood north of Big Beaver between Coolidge and Crooks. It's outlined in the overhead in red. It's on the east side of McClure. And that's a close-up of the property. This matter was heard and a public hearing was held at the October meeting, and the board adjourned the matter to allow the city attorney to incorporate a proposed resolution incorporating the board's comments. I'll turn it back over to the board for any discussion.
Okay, very good. Any discussion by the member of the board? We already did open public comment about this item already, so we're not going to do that again. Is there a member of the board who would like to be recognized? Mr. Green.
I move that we incorporate Mr. Bossenbrook's language from the previous motion into this motion with any modifications necessary to make it conform to this motion.
What I would like, just to be clear, is if you could read the resolution.
Resolution, I apologize.
Say again?
Sorry, resolution, I apologize.
That's okay. I'd like you to read it
Yes, sir.
for the record.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As printed, without modifications,
Correct.
the proposed resolution reads, variance request Stuffa for Tollbrook West LLC 3086-3114-3142 McClure, resolved a use variance in accordance with the Big Beaver zoning district. If a use variance is not granted, applicant appeals the July 22nd, 2019 decision of the Troy City Council to deny Tollbrook West's request to rezone property from R1B, one family residential district, to BB, Big Beaver district. Resolved that the use variance for the property located at 3086, 3114, 3142 McClure, currently zoned R1B, one family residential, to be denied. The Zoning Board of Appeals makes the following findings and conclusions based on the written materials, comments, and testimony of the applicant's representatives, other interested persons, professional consultants, and other factual material presented to the board to assist with deliberation. The applicant has not demonstrated that the site cannot be used for any other use allowed within the current zoning designation of R1B. It is the explicit finding of this board that the property can be used for the purposes permitted in the current zoning district R1B. 2. There are no unique circumstances peculiar to this property. The applicant has not proven that there are certain features or conditions of the land that are generally applicable throughout the zone, nor has the applicant demonstrated through expert testimony that these features make it impossible to earn a reasonable return without some adjustment. Specifically, A, the parcel is not exceptionally narrow or shallow, tending to prevent the site from being used for any other use allowed within the current zoning designation R1B. B, there are no topographical conditions or other extraordinary situations on the parcel tending to prevent the site from being used for any other use allowed within the current zoning designation R1B. 3, granting a use variance where the applicant would be allowed to develop the parcel with any allowable use under BB district zoning will alter the essential character of the adjacent neighborhood and be a detriment to adjacent properties. 4, the applicant has not identified a specific use for the property within the proposed BB district zoning. Therefore, it is difficult to adequately assess whether the capacity and operations of public roads, utilities, or other facilities and services will be significantly compromised. However, the BB district in general allows for more intense uses than R1B zoning. Therefore, it is reasonable to presume the impact on the adjacent road, Alpine, which is smaller and more narrow than other roads in the BB district and which does not have enough right-of-way to construct a sidewalk, will be compromised. 5, the need for the variance request is self-created by the applicant. Be it further resolved that this board declines to address that portion of the application seeking to appeal the July 22nd, 2019 legislative decision of the Troy City Council denying Tollbrook West's request to rezone the property located at 3086, 3114, 3142 McClure from R1B, one family residential district to BB, Big Beaver District, because this board does not have jurisdiction over such request under Troy's zoning ordinance section 15.04B.
Mr. Green. Is there a member of the board who'd like to be recognized? Did you move? Ms. Bloom?
Not a member of the board, but perhaps I did take note of Mr. Bossenbrook's suggested revisions, and I can read those into the record if you'd like me to read them into the record as well to be a part of this resolution.
You should do that, or you want to?
I'm happy to do that since I took notes, unless Mr. Bossenbrook would like to do it.
I'll defer to.
Okay. So the other paragraphs would be that the applicant has presented no evidence of an unnecessary hardship, and that the petitioner has failed to demonstrate all of the elements have been satisfied for a use variance, and an insertion in paragraph 1 that the site cannot reasonably be used for any other use allowed within the current zoning designation. And then also, there is one additional correction in paragraph 4. The street name actually should be McClure rather than Alpine. And I believe that that captures the resolution as.
Is that acceptable to the, who was the motion maker? Mr. Green?
That is acceptable, yes.
Okay, and who was the seconder? I can't remember.
Seconded.
Mr. Desmond, is that acceptable to you?
Yes.
Okay. And we already opened up for public comment? No. No, sir. No, sir. No. Any comment from the public would have been accepted earlier when we we opened the microphone up. So is there, unless a member of the board wants to, Mr. Green?
I move to allow the petitioner to.
You don't have to move. You usually have to request.
I request that.
Okay, sir, come forward. You're at the discretion of the board.
Greg Oboy on behalf of the petitioner. With regards to item B that's before the board right now.
It's not B.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is B. I'm sorry. How did I get that wrong? Sorry.
I'll take that as an apology. There's a little typo. It says Tollbrook West. That West only applies to Alpine. McClure is just merely Tollbrook LLC. I think it's stated in the resolution, but there's just a typo, and that's all I just wanted to point out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is that acceptable to the
It is.
resolution creator and seconder?
And I think the
To
applicant.
change that? Okay. So that is the resolution. Any further discussion? Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote with all the changes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Agawas,
Yes.
Mr. Desmond,
Yes.
Mr. Bossenbrook,
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Yes.
The resolution is agreed to. All right, well, we move right along to, somehow that parcel number threw me off. I kept thinking that was, everything was in item A, but was A and B. We move on to item C, which is related to 826 Marengo?
Marengo.
Marengo. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a variance request for a proposed lot split for property on Marengo. In the overhead here, we have the property essentially outlined in red in the middle of the slide. And this is in a residential neighborhood north of Square Lake and west of Rochester Road. There's a close-up of the neighborhood. The subject property is at 826 Marengo on the south side of the street. And that's a further close-up of the property and how it looks right now. The applicant is proposing to split the parcel into two, and each resulting parcel will have 80 feet of width and frontage. Now, the zoning ordinance requires that newly created parcels in this zoning district have 100 feet of width and frontage. So in order to proceed with that split, he's seeking relief from the board for those two factors. I'll turn it over to the board for any further questions.
Mr. Eisbacher.
I'm curious if you have any further information as to what was presented in the packet about when these two parcels were combined.
I do not.
Okay, because it's interesting that they were connected at some point in time without a request for the connection being recorded, according to the information in the packet. Like it was platted as two separate properties, and it magically got conjoined. And we don't have a record of when that was requested.
Well, I'm not suggesting we don't have a record of it. I didn't research that.
Okay.
Yeah, but right now, it has one tax parcel identification number.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else for city staff? I will call the petitioner forward. Please identify yourself and mention your relationship to the property in question.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the board. My name is Ali Apahidian. I am the owner and the petitioner of the property located at 826 Marengo Drive. I will try to keep things as brief as possible because there are other petitioners after me tonight. I submitted a very detailed packet with my application. I won't cover all those details. I just want to give you a brief overview. But more importantly, I want to explain how this variance request meets all 5 ZBA requirements for practical difficulty. The subject property was originally platted as 2 individual lots, 8 and 9, with 2 unique parcel ID numbers on July 13, 1953, as part of the Clark Estate subdivision. In 1953, the city of Troy was still a township, and the zoning ordinance did not exist. The existing house, located on Lot 8 of the subject property, was built in 1956 and is the same size and shape today as when it was originally constructed. The City of Troy records indicate that on June 24, 1957, the zoning ordinance number 23-1 was passed. The passage of this ordinance was effectively the first time the property became zoned as an R1B parcel with a minimum frontage requirement of 100 feet. This property was legally platted and had the existing home built on it prior to ordinance number 23-1 being adopted by the City Council. From 1953 to 2011, for 58 years, the subject property legally existed as 2 unique taxable lots, Lot 8 with a house and Lot 9 as a vacant lot. In 2011, the 2 lots were assigned a new tax ID number as 1 parcel for assessing and tax purposes only. After inquiring at the City Assessing Department about this tax ID change, they indicated that no property survey or any other record exists that can document this modification. Oakland County also confirmed when I requested information from them that a certificate of merger does not exist and no such document of anything similar was ever recorded with the Register of Deeds. The standard of granting a non-use variance is more lenient than for a use variance. and I quote, "To justify the grant of a non-use variance, there need only be a showing of practical difficulty. It is not necessary to show unnecessary hardship," end quote. This is based on the docket number 14022, Michigan Court of Appeals, in the case of Heritage Hill Association, Inc. versus Grand Rapids. And literal interpretation of the dimensional requirements would involve practical difficulties resulting directly from the exceptional characteristics of the subject property, namely the frontage dimension of the property. These characteristics relate directly to the property itself and are not of a personal nature. These characteristics were created by the current or they were not created by the current or previous owner. The correct characteristics were created by zoning ordinance 23-1 being imposed on lots 8 and 9 that were legally platted 3 years prior to this ordinance being adopted and implemented by Troy City Council. The size of the subject property is unique because it is the only residential property in the Clark Estate subdivision of 72 lots whose legal description was modified and today is different than when it was originally platted in 1953. The subject property is also unique because the proposed split will result in return the lots back to how they were originally platted. The proposed split will not reduce the lot frontage or area of the lots 8 and 9 from how they were originally platted. The proposed split will also restore lots 8 and 9 to be identical in size to 24 of the 26 lots on Marengo. These 24 lots are 60% deeper and 28% larger in area than the minimum requirements for lots in the R1B district. The 2 lots resulting from the proposed lot split will each be 82% deeper and 41% larger in area than the 3 abutting properties directly to the south, which are also zoned R1B. A literal interpretation of the ordinance's dimensional requirements in this instance is unnecessary to uphold the spirit and practical purposes of the ordinance and to preserve the consistency of the neighborhood. On the other hand, a literal enforcement of the width requirements would unreasonably restrict the right to use and build a single-family home on Lot 9 as was originally intended and permitted by the 1953 Clark Estates plat. The literal enforcement of the width requirement would also unreasonably prohibit me from using Lot 9 of the subject property with the same rights granted to all the other property owners on Marengo with identical lots. Historical aerial maps and other city records clearly document that more than half of the houses built on Marengo on these 80-foot lots, including both homes directly adjacent to mine and all 4 homes directly across the street, were built after the 100 R1B lot requirement was adopted by City Council. The proposed variance will not alter the essential character of the surrounding area or otherwise result in any harmful or negative consequences. The proposed split will not have any negative aesthetic impact on the surrounding area because it is preserving all aspects of the subject property exactly how it was originally planned and intended to be used. The granting of the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the ordinance. The proposed variance will not impair the supply of air or light, will not unreasonably increase traffic congestion, will not increase the danger of fire or endanger public safety, and will in no way be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the general welfare. There are no practical considerations that support a literal enforcement of the width requirement in this instance, and granting the variance request will serve the interest of justice. In conclusion, the evidence is clear that I will face practical difficulties if the width requirement is enforced literally as a result of the exceptional characteristics of the subject property. By granting the requested variance, the spirit of the ordinance will be observed, the surrounding area will not be negatively impacted, and the substantial justice will be done. For all these reasons, I respectfully request that the Zoning Board of Appeals grant this variance request. Thank you.
Excuse me, did I hear the name Clark in a couple of your comments?
Yes, you did.
I didn't even know there was a subdivision named Clark in Troy. Of course, I live here. Very good. Is there, Vice Chairman Nogales?
Sure. As you probably know, one of the big requirements relates to health, safety, and welfare, and the concern that the request wouldn't diminish or impair property values. So I guess I have a couple-part question here. What's your plan should the request be approved with splitting of the 2 lots? And how would you benefit the community as opposed to causing injury or impairment to property values?
So the plan is, as I submitted in the package, is to split the property and just build one single-family home on the vacant lot that exists right now. The legal description of the property is actually includes lot 8 and 9 and part of the legal description. And this subdivision, when platted originally, intended to have a home on this property. It doesn't impact negatively the neighborhood at all, because that's what this lot was intended to be. There's nothing injurious. The property itself, there's a brand new home that was constructed 2 years ago directly across the street, kitty corner to my property, and it's a brand new home that fits in the neighborhood. I spoke to the owner of that property, and she is actually in favor of the split. She favors that because it will actually bring value to the neighborhood, even though you don't take that in consideration, but that was her comment, so just wanted to mention that.
Sure.
Anyone else? Mr. Bosenberg.
I have two questions. The first is, and I'm going off of, I think, a drawing you submitted in your packet.
Yes.
Is it your intent to remove part of the existing house? It looks like you said you're going to remove part of the garage. Is that? And I guess as I'm looking at it, if you split it in half, it looks like that house that's there is, exactly on the property line. So I'm wondering what you're going to do with that existing structure so that that would sort of fit with the other homes on the other properties in terms of dimension.
So the existing home that's there is about 3.5, 4 feet off the center of the property line that's split. So exactly the way I submitted in the application is that my intent is actually to remove a portion of the garage in order to remove that nonconformity that existed, because the way the property was actually split prior to 2011, that home exists there, and it was a non-conforming structure as soon as zoning ordinance was actually implemented, so it became a non-conforming structure. So my intent, part of this request, is to remove that portion of the garage to create enough setback where that structure becomes conforming, and that setback requirement is met.
If this variance was to be granted, would you have any problem with something like a stipulation like that being put into the language of the variance?
No, not at all, because that actually is my intent to do that. So I have no problem with any kind of language that requires that structure, that portion of the structure to be removed to meet that setback requirement.
Okay, and then my other question is, when did you acquire this property?
So I purchased this home about 3 months ago.
3 months ago.
Correct.
Has this subject property ever been requested to have this lot split in the past that you're aware of?
I am not aware of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Green.
On purchase of the property, were you aware, or prior to, were you aware of the irregularity or oddness with the title saying one thing and the property being laid out in another way?
If I was aware of the property.
Yeah, were you aware? Sorry, were you aware of the nonconformity? Thank you. Prior to purchase or during investigation?
So the property right now has no nonconformity at all. There is no nonconformity with the property. I'm not sure I understand the question.
I believe you said that was it the title that is listed with both the old lot prior to its joining in 2011?
So are you asking about the existing structure?
Not the structure itself. I'm asking about the ownership, the lot itself as defined on paper in the purchase documents. Were you aware that this had at one point been considered that it was otherwise irregular, other than the visual suspicion that you may have had?
So when I purchased this property, I did my due diligence, and I knew the history of this property in terms of when it was platted, that it existed as two separate lots for 58 years, that and no longer exist as two separate lots, that the legal description actually includes Lot 8 and 9. So yes, I in terms of understanding the history and when this property was platted and how it was platted, I was fully aware of the history of how this property and the whole neighborhood came about, yes.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a comment. According to the current public record, the current legal description of this property is Clark Estates Lot 8 and 9. So it is still indicated as two separate lots within the public record. So,
Vice Chairman Nagawas.
Quick question as I was thinking about it. So I know that there'll probably be a few people in opposition to this request, but what's your general feeling or feedback from some of your neighbors or people living on the street with your request?
So I've only spoken to one neighbor, and that's the neighbor across the street on the as I mentioned, right across the street diagonally to my property, and she was in favor of this. I didn't speak to the neighbor adjacent, but I did hear her speak at the previous meeting, and she was concerned. She had her concerns expressed, and my comment to that is it's this property, her home as well as half of the homes in the neighborhood were developed after the zoning ordinance got passed of 100 feet, and this property is just one lot of 24 lots in the neighborhood. Anything that will go on here will just fit within the neighborhood. It won't be any smaller, any narrower, any shallower. It'll be identical to all the neighbors' properties, and it will just fit with the neighbor just right.
Another member of the board. Okay, if you could have a seat, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to turn it over to Vice Chairman Nagawas. He's going to share if we have any communications.
Yes, 3 emails in and all have concerns, so all 3 are against the variance request.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Public hearing is open. If you'd like to address the board on this matter, please proceed to the microphone and be recognized. Second call. Hello?
Hello, I'm Rob Petrock III.
Can you tell us your relationship to the property, or?
I'm just a resident in Troy, so I don't have any actual relation to this.
Are you close to this property?
I'm off of Waddles, so it's not.
Okay.
I'm familiar. I've grown up in Troy, so I'm very familiar with many of the neighborhoods in Troy. But I would say
Clark Estates, right?
I'm not particularly familiar with specifically Clark Estates, but I'm familiar with other areas of Troy and many of the subdivisions. And I just want to state on record that I would be in favor of it. I think that this does add consistency and harmony, as the petitioner said. So I think this is actually consistency has always been a good thing in my book for Troy. So I would actually be very much in favor of this, and just wanted to state that for the record.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Please proceed to the microphone.
Hi, my name's Deborah Lizecki.
You have to repeat that. It has to be on the record.
Yes.
At the microphone. There we
Hi,
go.
I'm Deborah Lizecki.
Hi, Deborah.
I'm not really for or against this, but I do have some things I'd like to share. When I first looked at the property, I'm a real estate broker. When I first looked at the property, I also thought, boy, this would make a great split. Called a client in to take a look at it. The client did talk with the city and was told that they absolutely could not split it. Rosenberger, who is the original owner of the property, I know the neighbor that was right next door, that is next door to this property. But he, at the time, was told, in caution here, this is hearsay because this is the neighbor telling me, okay? But anyways, what she stated was the son at the time when Rosenberger, the original owner, had built that house, wanted to build a house on the property next to it, on the vacant lot, and he was denied. Whitney, who then took over the property, was also told they couldn't build on the property, but the taxes were, for the lot, was almost the same amount as it was with the house, so that's when they went in and put it all together. The realtor that had the property listed that I had spoke to when we were looking at it stated that the owner, which was Ramirez's, and I might be totally slaughtering that name, but anyways, they were told that the lot, it definitely could not be split. So my only concern is here is that if it hasn't been able to be split all along, and again, this is third-party information, so take it as it is. But if it can't have been split on other times that has been asked, and it's not formally asked, I'm sure. It's probably a phone call just like my client did. But I just wanted to bring that up, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. And this board is very different than what the zoning ordinance is, because we have the ability to break the zoning ordinance. We have the ability to grant variances. So what the city may say on a given day during the week doesn't really apply, in that we vote and we can grant those variances. Okay, final call. You already spoke. Okay, I think we're good. Final call for public comment on this issue. Final call. Okay. Close the public comment out. Bring it to the board table for consideration or discussion,
Got a
debate.
question
Mr.
for city
Desmond.
staff. Is there any record of a variance being requested on this property formally in the past?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
I got another question.
Gelson.
Because of the property now is going to split in two. Does she have to come back for another variance now to allow the width of the property from 100 to 80?
Well, this request covers frontage and width. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this covers both. So if the request is granted, they won't have to come back for the parcel width or frontage.
Other member of the board. Vice Chairman Nagaus.
So these lot splits come up fairly often with our board. We see probably a couple a year, and I decided to go back and just see how we handled prior lot splits. And I could have gone a lot further on the history, but the two most recent ones, only a few months ago, July 2019, a petitioner came for a lot split on Waddles Road, and we unanimously denied that request, and the linchpin there was that it didn't conform with the other lots on Waddles. There is a mixed bag, and some were wide and some were narrow, and it just didn't conform. So unanimously rejected. About a year ago, October 2018, Boyd Street, if you remember Boyd Street, it was rejected because of safety concerns, mainly because it was by a school. And a lot of congestion there with safety issues. And another key point there was the prior owner caused the hardship because a prior owner merged the two lots together. The new owner came and wasn't involved directly, but it was a prior owner that actually caused that. So in this case, this petition didn't cause the hardship because it seems like it just somehow got combined. I haven't heard any safety concerns yet as far as schools or narrow roads, et cetera. And there is harmony between all the other lots being generally around the same size. So that makes me lean towards granting the variance. And the one thing maybe we can talk about that I haven't mentioned is the exceptional characteristics of the property, which you could argue it's simply being twice as large as all the other lots. But I'll leave that kind of open-ended there. Yeah.
Thank you.
I actually agree. I looked at the Boyd, I remember the Boyd property, and this, the major conversation around the Boyd property was specific to the congestion issues, it being directly on the corner by the school, safety concerns for children. They would have had to chew into part of that split to add in sidewalks. None of those concerns were present in this particular instance, so I also agree I would lean towards granting this in comparison to previous versions that are similar but not exactly the same.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Green.
Hi, I actually have a question. First off, at first glance, and second, this seems like a fairly obvious effort to conform with the neighborhood around. The proposal is to make it like, as the petition notes, every lot surrounding, and I would say that's very much in the spirit point, well, several of these, but point A specifically, I do have a question. As Vice Chairman Agawas mentioned, this is an exceptional characteristic relative to those nearby. The terms specify that we shall consider certain elements, but that, just to verify on the record, that does not preclude us considering other considerations such as exceptional width of the. So right now, the language says shall be considered, the characteristics which shall be considered include exceptional narrowness, shallowness, smallness, irregular shape, topography, vegetation, and other similar characteristics. I could see this being irregular shape, but I just wanted to clarify that if that wouldn't flow as it is in fact a fairly regular polygon, that this would be more of a, that we are allowed to consider exceptional wideness as opposed to narrowness. And as long as we are, then I just wanted to verify that point. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Another member of the board. Seeing that we don't have anyone else who'd like to speak, we are prepared for a vote. Mr. Evans.
Oh, let me formalize this into a motion here. If there's no other comments. I'll make a motion to grant the variance because of A, the exceptional characteristic being that it's twice as large or twice as wide than most of the other properties in the neighborhood or on that street. The characteristics relate to the premises. They're not of a personal nature. They weren't caused by the owner or previous owners. And to my knowledge, there's no diminishment of value or impairment to the neighborhood, no health, safety, or welfare issues.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Agawas and Desmond. Any further discussion? Mr. Bosenberg.
I would like the board to entertain the suggestion of amending that motion to require the petitioner to, if there's a split, to make the existing structure conform on the, what would be one of the single lots, so that if there's someone who purchases, if there's a second house constructed and they purchase it, that new owner isn't, put off by the fact that this existing structure is essentially at the property line. So I guess I would like to have a stipulation added to the variance is approved, that the petitioner do what's necessary with the existing structure to make it conforming to setbacks and so forth.
Is that a motion?
That was my motion to amend.
That would be an amendment, yes.
The motion on the floor.
Is there a second to Mr. Bosenberg's amendment to the motion?
I will amend, or I will second the amendment.
Mr. Eisenbacher seconds the amendment. So discussion on the amendment. Sorry. Mr. Evans.
Just clarification on that amendment for the motion maker in the second is that this, if it's granted, the existing house has to conform to the setback requirement before the split can go through, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Excuse me. To the new house, it has to go through the planning department, right? And meet the criteria.
I don't think I heard you.
The width of the house and the distance from the properties.
Will any new construction have to go through the planning to conform?
Oh, well, new construction, yes, all new
property?
construction would have to comply with the zoning ordinance. If it can't, they're going to have to come to this board to seek relief.
Okay, thank you. That's what
I also have a question. If I just heard that correctly, if we are requesting that existing structure be brought into conformity prior to the split being allowed, that would make him have to begin construction on that property before he's given the split on the second property?
Right. Well, actually, make the existing house compliant and eliminate the encroachment to that new split line.
Well, that's before he would then begin any construction on the second lot.
Right, because we would not allow construction on the second lot until the assessor's office approves the parcel split.
Okay. All right, I guess.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
I know this is not typical, but there's some logistics with that. If you don't have two different construction crews, if the one construction crew is going to be doing both construction, let's make it simple. This isn't a big, giant monster project. Can we make it so that the building permit is, what's the simplest
Or
way to do this? so that-
CFO can't be granted until the second lot's brought into compliance, because
Yeah.
then that would be after construction, and it would be a summary of, does that make sense? Like, basically, trying to not make it so he has to deal with everything up front and then go through the process of getting the...
So you can't get a certificate of occupancy on the new house until the other house is compliant, or something along those lines.
I think in order to, I think the motion maker was intending that it be conforming before the split is allowed. So I think that that is the greatest protection, to make sure that you don't have another house that's erected that is so close that that it is going to be a health, safety, and welfare concern. So I understand that you are reluctant to, with the logistics of it, but he's already indicated that he's willing to do that, and I think it provides the greatest protection for the health, safety, and welfare of the community.
That makes sense. And in effect, even to do that kind of construction, I mean, for them to start excavating or doing anything, you're going to have that done anyway. So I guess it's kind of a semantic dance.
Okay.
So they're just trying to avoid any onerous extra obligation, but I guess you're right. Any direction that would happen, that would have to occur first. So, okay.
Mr. Green.
Just to clarify, that wouldn't impose any time restriction on that. Should the current owner take, and this is not a restriction, I just want to verify that he would have that freedom to take his time to modify, demolish, correct as requested before that variances.
Variances are good for a year, so he would have to have the survey done to amend the lot split application with the assessor. That would include setbacks of the house that's supposed to be cut off. And if the assessor is comfortable with the setbacks with the proposed split, he can process it in accordance with the variance. But he would have a year, if granted tonight, he'd have a year to complete that process.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
That stands.
Okay, so we are prepared for a vote. Mr. Evans, this vote is on the amendment that Mr. Bosenbrook offered, and that was moved, and so it agrees with his changing the main resolution. Second vote would be on the main resolution, which would be changed if Mr. Bosenbrook's amendment is agreed to. So if we're all understanding that, Mr. Evans, we're prepared.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Agawas?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis?
Yes.
Mr. Bosenbrook?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
So that's agreed to. The main motion has now been changed, incorporating that amendment. So this next vote is on the main motion with the amendment as a part of it. Mr. Green.
I would like to propose an amendment to the amended motion. I would ask that, based on one of the comments provided to us from the applicant's neighbors, that if it is within our purview, that we request, that we compel that the any additional, any construction on the currently vacant portion that would become the second lot have to, in addition to, as approved by the planning department, have to conform with the majority of the surrounding construction. So specifically limited to 2 stories in height.
The whole city's that way.
My amendment would require that the new lot be limited, any construction on that new lot be limited to 2 stories in height in order to conform to the vast majority of the surrounding construction. No?
No. That's an extra layer that I don't, too far. Yep.
That's what I was asking.
I think it's superfluous because I think it's already going to be addressed by the zoning that's already there.
I only ask because there is at least one nearby house which is referred to in one of the letters, which is of a different height.
Well, and if I could offer, Mr. Chair,
Mr. Evans.
the zoning ordinance currently restricts building height to 30 feet in the district and 2.5 stories in height. So other properties, if they're that way now or in the future, they could come to that height restriction and not come to this board.
Yeah.
Mr. Green still.
Withdraw.
Okay.
Which we're going for.
Yeah.
If it was
Already there.
seconded, you wouldn't be able to do that.
No.
But I didn't see a second. So any other discussion?
Legal motion.
Mr. Evans, we're prepared to vote.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Agawas,
Yes.
Mr. Desmond,
Yes.
Mr. Bossenbrook,
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Yes.
Motion carries. We're on to item D. By the way, you have your variance. Have a good night. 2395 Kingsbury. How many people are here for this item? Okay, quite a few. Mr. Evans.
Okay, and this is for actually 4 variances for proposed construction at 2395 Kingsbury. The subject property is in a neighborhood west of Adams Road, and no, that doesn't show. Well, it's west of Adams Road, and I can't remember. I believe it's north of South Boulevard. But either way, it's outlined in red on the overhead. There we go. That was my error. It's north of Waddles there. And the zoning map is overlaid. Everything you see in yellow, including the subject property, is zoned single-family residential. And there's a close-up of the property. As you can see, it's a large parcel at the southern terminus of Kingsbury Road. The applicant's proposing to build a detached garage, and here's a picture from the plans. One of the variants they're seeking is for the height of the detached garage. Now, this is the front elevation, and the proposed height of the garage is 17 feet. The zoning ordinance restricts the proposed height to 14 feet. That blue line I've shown indicates the approximate location of the 17-foot height distance, and as you can see, that's measured at the midpoint between the peak and the eaves. So the second variance he's requesting is to allow a 2-story garage. In this instance, the construction plans show it's going to be 2 stories, where only 1 story is allowed. The third variance he's requesting is to allow the detached structure to have a 3-foot setback from the side lot line. This is the aerial again, and I've kind of pointed out the proposed location of the shed, which is right here along the east property line. This is the house. And this blue line here that tries to be drawn contiguous with this line of Kingsbury, the area between Kingsbury and this blue line is considered the front yard. So he needs a request to put it in the front yard, and that's number 4. But also the ordinance requires that the detached structure be 6 feet from the side property line, and his site plan is proposing to put it in that area 3 feet from the side property line. So in order to proceed, he needs relief on those 4 provisions from the board. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Anyone for city staff? Okay, we'll call the petitioner forward.
My name's Ken Shaheen. I'm the owner of the property. So what I'm trying to do is build a garage. It's a large property, as you can see, so I have equipment to cut it, lawnmowers, whatnot, to take care of it, and I do the own maintenance on my property. So I had 2 sheds. The thing that makes my property unique is the majority of the property sits within the 100-year floodplain, and the DEQ won't let me build within the 100-year floodplain, so that means the only piece of property that I can build on is a small square where the house is located in the corner there. So I had the previous sheds were located in the south end of the property in the woods. I had 2 sheds there. They were infested with animals, and so we took them down. So I would love to build it. If you'll let me sign a waiver, I'd build it further away from the house in the floodplain, because I'm just going to park equipment and stuff in there. But if I comply by the requirements to build it out of the 100-year floodplain, the only spot I can stick it is there. The only request I have, well, if I don't go 3 feet from the lot line, I'm going to have to take out part of my driveway. So I'm trying to not have to do that, because that makes it a lot more difficult to turn around the circle there. And then the circle drive, yeah. The part about the height, I just want it to fit the home so it's not detracting. If I put a small shed or a 1-story so close to my house, it's going to architecturally detract a lot from the way that the house looks. I just want it to be in harmony. I'm not interested in extra space. I just want it to look like something that's reasonably like the home, and I've included some photos in the packet. And as far as the front yard goes, the original entry to the property was where the red arrow was on the south. It came on the south side of the pond. And when this house was built, they shared a driveway with the adjacent property. They traded that off for the current entrance, which now comes off Kingsbury. So the front of the house faces the pond. So this is actually technically the side of the home where the garage is going. So, if that makes sense. So, and I don't know what other questions I can answer.
Questions for the petitioner? Mr. Eisenmacher.
You definitely qualify as a oddly shaped property, and you've got lots of features that make it difficult. But the one thing that struck me immediately is, why didn't you just consider making your current garage on that, what looks like the north end of the house, a little bit longer to accommodate your extra storage?
Extra expense, because to do that I'd have to tear out. There's a big landscaping feature there with a tree and stuff in the house, so it's a lot more expense to if you see where the blue arrow on the picture is pointing, yeah, that's the end of the garage you're referring to.
Well, yeah, at the end of the house, right?
Yeah, so it would just be a lot more expense to do that. So,
unfortunately, expense is outside of our purview as a board in terms of hardships. Is there any other practical reason? Is it?
I mean, it would also narrow. I'm not sure there's enough room there, because it would narrow my driveway again, and getting in and out of the drive is already relatively narrow. If I were to extend that garage, it would be very difficult to get out of that driveway the way it is, because you have to kind of curve around it as it is.
Oh, so you'd have to set it back from, okay.
Yes.
And that sidewalk is the entrance for people access, right?
Correct. So I'm up against I'd block that off if I offset it to get the extension. I don't have a lot of options unless you want to give me let me build in the floodplain, and I'll sign a waiver.
Okay. And then the other one is the height of the garage. That was one of the items on the request, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
What's the hardship for needing the extra height?
If I put a 1-story in that close to my current home, it's going to look like a big shed sitting next to my home. I'm just trying to get something that's architecturally as close as possible to what the current home looks like, so I don't downgrade the value of my home. So if you drive in, the first thing you see is a big shed. If it's in the configuration that I picked, it will at least look like the home is, like the home does, so it's not going to be a big eyesore architecturally look indistinct. This will at least have some relevance to the house, kind of blend to the current construction of the house. That's all I'm trying to do is get it so I don't devalue my home. So, that's all.
Another member of the board, Mr. Bosenbrook.
So just to clarify, are you unable to build another shed where your old sheds were?
It's in the floodplain.
So those previous ones were like grandfathered in? So
They were just there.
They were just there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Green.
Sorry. Can you please bring up the GIS, the floodplain map, Mr. Evans?
He did supply in your application.
Yes. Just for...
Sure.
Page 3,565.
Did you have a lot of water the year we had the flood 5-6 years ago?
I have water all the time. I have water in certain
Did you
parts
have
of
a lot of water? Because I live in a floodplain too.
Yeah.
I back up to a spill basin. And that was for the 100-year flood too. And the water came almost all the way up to my garage. It was
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Anyhow, right now, where I wanted to put it was an old picture in the GIF. That's where I would have liked to have put it, but the DEQ said no, and Troy won't, at least in the other part, said they won't let me do it. I'd rather keep it down there, but there's not a lot of space otherwise. That little circle, the white circle you see is the turnaround. So I just have a small window in which to put the place. Again, I'd put it elsewhere if you'll give me permission, so.
I don't think we have that ability.
And how much land you have available outside the floodland?
Just what you see in that.
How much is that?
How much is it? Not enough to put that structure because it's either driveway.
How many square feet? That's all. I mean, square yards or whatever.
It's not big enough. That's the only spot that's big enough to accommodate that. That's 625 square feet. That is the only spot that will accommodate that. So.
So otherwise, it's another hardship right there.
It's just because of the floodplain and the drives, and some of it's on a slope, so it's not suitable for building. So.
Mr. Bosbrook.
One more question. Your submission says that your neighbor does not object to the variance. Which neighbor does not object?
The one directly behind it has the 4-acre spot. So it would be the northernmost property. That's where the garage would back up to his property. And I called him and asked him. So it's with the big circle-y drive where it says proposed location, that property. I spoke to that neighbor and asked him if he minded if it was within 3 feet as opposed to 6 feet. Okay. So, unless he wrote otherwise, at least when I spoke to him.
Just have a question. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but this board has no jurisdiction to supersede DE.
Correct.
But that's what I thought. I just wanted to say it. So, thank you.
Jurisdiction for what, I'm sorry?
For the DEQ
Floodplain.
was doing it, right? Yeah.
Floodplain.
Yeah. Floodplain.
Or the lines.
Another member of the board. Okay, can you have a seat?
Thanks.
Vice Chairman Nagawas, do we have any communications?
Nothing.
Thank you. Public hearing is open. If you want to address the board on this matter, come to that microphone. Just mention any relationship you have to the property as far as being close or...
My name's Tim.
Yeah.
My name is Tim Opie. I live at 2272. I've been there 20 years. I gave the builder of that house an easement for gas to build the house so that they could have the pond and the property in front of them. They originally did share that road, and there was a pond, storage units up that drive in the bushes. As the neighbor, we love our neighbors, but granting the variances we have a problem with. We're okay with what he does on his property, but looking out my back door, I'm up. He puts 17 feet, he blocks me. He does get water. I was in agreement if he was able to build down by the water. If he put 17 feet, we have a problem in Troy with garages anyway. Is there going to be a mother-in-law house or something up there? That's another concern we have. We have a nice, tight neighborhood. Anyone have any questions about the property? I haven't been there the longest, but I'm pretty close. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. Eisenbach.
I have a question for the
Sir.
gentleman, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Do you know of a scenario where you would be satisfied?
If Mr. Shaheen needs to build a shed and put it on his property, I'll support him, but I can't go with 17 feet.
Sure.
I can't go with a 3-foot setback off my property line, which is only 15 feet from the corner. So now we're going to jam that up. Yeah. Okay? So I know we need storage, and we want to work together, but there are things that you set in the zoning that we have to abide by. And this affects all of us.
Yes, yes. Yes, it takes a lot of criteria for us to give an exception to our zoning. Inherently, because of his shape of the property and the topography and the stream, he meets the harder part of it that most people don't meet, because most of the houses in the city are quite similar, and they're on a simple lot with no topography.
Right.
So he's got hardships because of the flooding, the setbacks.
And I don't think he's seen the flooding we've seen there.
Right, and if he blocks the light from your house, that's a reason not to grant a variance. So helping me understand the impact on you helps me make a good decision. So
I'll give him room in my garage if he needs it.
Thank you.
Someone else who wants to address the board?
Good evening. Mark St. Cyr, resident at 2288 Prestwick Drive, which is kitty corner to the 2395 address we're speaking about. Here more than anything to offer an iota of support, having built on floodplains many, many times throughout the USA, building tens of thousands of telecommunication towers. If that is in fact really the restraint, it's a very simple solution to raise the structure out of that floodplain to get to that height. We did it hundreds and hundreds of times in Houston and in Columbus, Ohio, near some very bad areas, trying to get our telecommunications in to get E911 for all the customers and get your service. So I'm just throwing that out there. Being an adjacent neighbor, it doesn't impact me per se from the standpoint like it does others that just spoke, but I'm throwing out the fact you don't do the DEQ, the DNR, EGLE, as it goes now, permitting, but I'm telling you, it's pretty simple. And especially if it's a shed structure that we're speaking of here, you can get those things elevated to whatever height you need very simply with Healy coil, concrete, and put foundations in. Put in many. So I wanted to offer that as an option to everyone tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Second call for public comment. Last call for public comment on this matter, and we are closed. So we bring it back to the board table. There's a member of the board who would like to be recognized. Please indicate that at this time. Gosh, it's already after 9 o'clock. Mr. Eisenbacher.
I see the hardship of the petitioner. I also fully acknowledge the gentleman who's his neighbor, who this would be the highest impact because it's closest to his residence. I don't believe there's any way to engineer a solution at this table. If no one has an objection, I would like to postpone this item to give the petitioner an opportunity to work with his neighbor to see if something can be worked out so that the visibility, the sight lines, and the aesthetic needs of both the petitioner and the neighbor can be met. Assuming I get a second.
Second.
Second, yeah.
Because both are good points at this time, and we can't engineer good solutions from the table.
Okay, you're doing discussion, so there's a motion, and a second, to postpone this item to
Next meeting.
December,
Yes.
or the next meeting, whenever that is, most likely December. So let's consider that. We can do any further discussion at this point, now that's properly moved. Anyone would like to be recognized?
I mean, I just like I don't know the specific details of actually building on a floodplain. I don't know the logistics of that. I don't know if that's something that's already been breached or looked into. But it seems like if that's something that is occurring out there, that might be something worth exploring. But I just agree. I mean, this is two very valid points, and there's no way up here to figure out a solution to that. So that's something that you guys really should come up with, and then I would say bring it back to us after you've got something, or else, I mean, the alternative is that somebody's going to leave here unhappy, and we really don't have the tools at our disposal to solve this on the table. So that's it.
Any other further discussion on the motion to postpone? Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Agawes.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kalsunas.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
No.
Mr. Bossenbrook.
Yes.
Motion carries. So we will see this back on our next agenda whenever we meet, which most likely will be December.
Currently is scheduled for December 17th, and we will not send out any notices,
Right.
any additional notices.
Great. We move on to the final action item, item E related to 23 Sheffield. Mr. Evans, can you please present to us on this?
Yes, they're requesting a variance to accommodate the proposed addition to a new home from the rear property line. The subject property is at 23 Sheffield. That's in a residential neighborhood north of 14 Mile and west of Stevenson Highway. It's outlined in red on the overhead. There's a closer view. The property is just two properties in from 14 Mile. And everything you see in yellow here is the city of Troy, and that's all zoned single-family residential, identical to the subject property. This is a close-up of the property. Sheffield's on the right. This is an aerial, and I've just delineated here the proposed location of some of the things we're going to see in the future slides here. They want to add on to the rear of the house in this area. This is the site plan that the applicants provided. This white area here is the proposed extension of the house, and it's proposed to be 7 feet from the rear property line. The ordinance requires any additions to the house be set back 35 feet from the rear property line. They provided, these are pages out of the application, some elevations to show what the proposed structure will look like. And that's the area in question within the application that's going to be covered if indeed a variance is granted. Did a little research here. It is, I think this photo shows best there is an existing encroachment to the rear property line for this attached portion of the house, and that was a variance granted in the 70s. So that gives sheds some light on why things are the way they are now with what's out there. So in order to proceed, they're requesting relief from the rear yard setback. I'll turn it over to the board for any questions.
Question from a member of the board, Vice Chairman Agawes.
Question for you, Mr. Evans. So is the way I'm reading this, this is an attached patio overhang, so it's open air? Or is there more to it than just a roof extension?
I believe so. Maybe we can ask the applicant, because sometimes it can be hard to tell from the elevations, but perhaps they could clarify if there's going to be walls or where those are going to be.
Okay.
Another member of the board. The applicant could come forward. Please identify yourself.
Good evening. My name is Brenda Shaludo. I live at 23 Sheffield here in Troy, 48083. I am here requesting to install a 9-foot tall roof only. It is open aired over my brick paver patio. So it'll be open aired and attached to the existing non-conforming home that has an attached garage. So back in 1976, there was zoning board approval to add a family room onto the back of my home and attach the garage, the existing garage. So that family room then was attached. So then I could drive in and go into my home from the garage. But anyway, that was 1976, way before my time. So I have the brick paver patio. I'd like to put a roof over that. It faces the west. I have, for years, I've been there since 2005, I have had nothing but full-on sun. And I've just tolerated it. When it gets too hot, I just go in. So I've not made good use of my outside small backyard. And so I wanted to build a roof over that so that we can enjoy it more with my family when we're out there. It's not going to be as far out as the garage is. It's going to be short of that, but it's to cover most of the patio. So, okay. So I had some pictures that show that each of my neighbors there, they can't really see it. The neighbors to the north, and they provided, I sent a letter out to all three of them. It's a quiet neighborhood, and we kind of keep to ourselves. But I sent a letter out to all three of them and asked them to return it with their comments, postage paid, whether or not they liked it or not, or they would approve it or not, or they had any issues with it. And I only got one back, so I've got that letter here if you want it. That was the neighbor to the north. And you guys get to see the pictures that I provided, so you can see that the neighbor to the north can't see into my backyard at all because of my garage. The neighbor to the west, I have a 6-foot wooden fence that also goes around my backyard, so it's a privacy fence. I can't see into their yard. They don't look into my yard. So that fence that goes along that west part, he has his shed back there, so I see the top of his roof of his shed. And then this side, which is the south side of my property, 6-foot fence, and their garage goes along that 6-foot fence. So we all have garages that are right there, and so that's why we have so much privacy. So this was not for privacy. This is simply to give me some shade so I can enjoy the backyard. It doesn't impact anyone at all. You can't see it. I think that's about it. We don't have an active association, so I think that's all. Do I have any questions?
Any questions for this petitioner, Mr. Eisenmacher?
I believe, based on reading your request, that the hardship is the smallness of the property?
It is pretty small, yeah. Once they put on that family room and that garage, that took up a big portion, a big chunk of the backyard.
Thank you.
Another member of the board. Okay, if you could have Mr. Green.
Sorry, do you know, was it one or two owners previously that family room was added?
That what?
That the family room was approved?
Oh, it was back in 1976. I did move in into 2005. And so I think the people before me, they were a young couple. I don't think they had been there that long either. Okay. So maybe 2 or 3 people before me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Another member. Vice Chairman Nogales.
One of the things we look at before passing a variance request is if there's other alternatives that wouldn't maybe violate the zoning ordinance. So have you looked into maybe temporary shade or extensions like that?
Yeah, I did, and I decided I'm getting ready to retire, and this is the only home this is my last home, and so I wanted something that would be permanent, that would be solid, that I wouldn't have to maintain or change out every 4 or 5 years. I mean, we've used the the umbrella there, but that only goes so far when the sun is just beating down that way. And you can see that's not a huge patio. The numbers look so big, but it's not really that big. But anyways, no, that's why I did that. It was like, I can use an umbrella. I've been using an umbrella, but it gets so sunny, I just go in the house. So I wanted something solid that would last many years.
Mr. Desmond.
My comment was very similar. I mean, in the event that, there wasn't a variance for this structure, I mean, I see them all the time at Costco or wherever. They're full, exterior freestanding metal patio enclosures.
Gazebos or, yeah, things
But,
like that.
it was just a statement, but.
Green.
Had you, I think Mr. Gauss alluded to it, had you considered something like, and pardon the use of a brand, something like a Sunset or the motorized extensible that attaches to the house but can be extended at need, so it's a much more permanent, much more robust than, say, canvas from a big box, but that also then would not break that requirement.
They wouldn't be as far out as I would like them. I also have heard other people that have had them, and after a few years, they've had issues with them, mechanical issues with them. So I did look into that, and again, so then I kept thinking, I need to make this solid and permanent so that it last a long, long time.
Another member. Okay, if you could have a seat.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman Agawes, any communications on this?
None.
Thank you. Okay. Public hearing is open on this matter. If you'd like to address the board, come to the microphone. Second call for any public comment. Final and last call for public comment on this matter. Present yourself to the podium. Close that out. Bring it back to the board table for possible action.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Question for our city attorney. Looking at the letter from the city of Troy from 1976 on page 3,581 of our agenda, next to the last page, scroll to the bottom, it says that the motion was approved for the side yard from 5 feet to 3 feet, and total side yards from 15 feet to 12 feet, and rear yard setback to 6 feet. If they're already granted for a variance of 6 feet, why do they need another variance? Oh, wrong person.
The next page, it's actually for that specific request that was presented at that time. So the next page on the agenda.
Oh, so it was, okay.
illustrates specifically what that letter that you're referring to, a summary of the variance, specifically what it encompassed. So at that time, this particular proposal wasn't even part of that variance request from 1976.
Okay, so it's just the footprint of the addition that was added on. Okay.
It's what was ever in the application and approval package from 1976.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there a member of the board that would like to be recognized? Any discussion? All right, we can't move forward. Mr. Eisenbacher.
No one else is going to make a motion. I will make a motion to approve and based on statement of practical difficulty A, for the smallness of the property. B, it's related to the premises. C, it's not of a personal nature, it's just a normal request that many people in our city have. It's not special for this one applicant. D, characteristics which make compliance with the dimensional requirement difficult, was not created by the current or previous owner. And E, the proposed variance is not harmful or alter the essential character of the area in which the property is located, will not impair the adequate supply of light and air to adjacent property, or unreasonably increase the congestion in the public streets, or increase the danger of fire or endanger the public safety or unreasonably diminish or impair established property value within the surrounding area or in any other respect impair the public health, safety, comfort, morals, or welfare of the inhabitants of the city. It's all covered.
Second.
Moved by Eisenbacher and Desmond, seconded properly, and we have discussion now. Mr. Green.
Sorry. I agree that there are some exceptional characteristics here. It is a small property. It's fairly shallow, and that's what required the expansion and the earlier variance. However, I question from a public safety perspective building a permanent structure that close to an additional wood fence that then is also very close to other structures. It concerns me that is a real potential at that point, that bringing those structures so close together could present a substantial safety concern from that perspective, that this is, if anything, more on a fire code question. And I apologize for that reason. I am leaning very strongly towards no on that basis, and only that basis. The rest is, to me, clear.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
I shared that concern, but then I believe it was pretty clear that this structure is going to be less close to the fences than the existing garage, and the garage is a lot more of a fire risk than a covered patio.
Another member. All right, Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Yes.
Mr. Agawas.
No.
Mr. Green.
No.
Mr. Clark.
Gosh, I could go either way on this one. It's just tough. I'm going to be a yes. Motion carries.
Mr.
Congratulations, you have your variance.
I missed-
Oh, I'm sorry. We have.
You got ahead of that.
Mr. Bostonbrook.
I'm sorry.
My vote is no.
Okay, so I think we had 3 no's. Is that correct?
3 no's and 4 yeses.
Yes. Motion carries. I am very sorry to you, sir.
That's all right.
Call the vote before someone has a chance to vote. So congratulations once again. This time it's real. Gosh, sometimes I do stupid things. Item number 6. Any communications, Mr. Evans? No. Item number 7, miscellaneous business. Is there a member of the board that is miscellaneous? Mr. Evans? No. Item number 8, public comment is open on any matter. Thanksgiving cookies or stuffing, turkey, whatever you want. Go ahead.
My name's Jim Pomeroy. I submitted a packet to be on the agenda back in October or whatever it was before the deadline, and I just wondered why it never made it to this agenda.
We don't address that here.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Evans, you will be available afterwards or during normal business hours tomorrow.
I can talk to you after.
We are not the city here. We're your.
Yeah, you can. I'll talk to him after the meeting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Second call for public comment, third call. That's closed out. And we are adjourned. We will see everyone after a blessed Thanksgiving to all, and we will see you in December.